Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Let's get on to it. So we were on Canto Bites, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, I think the problem with the whole section involving Canto Bites is it was a shotgun approach to try to tackle as many political issues as they possibly could in one shot instead of focusing on one political problem, because we had the avarice of the rich on full display. We had slavery. We had mistreatment of animals, and we had, a critique of the military industrial complex in very, very short order. And it didn't give enough time to explore the nuance of any of those issues.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's be honest, I think we can all agree the military industrial complex does go too far, but we also have some of the greatest innovations that have come forward from humanity that have erupted from those from that industry.
Conflict always leads to in response, it always leads to development, right? And the Sith would argue that that's the nature of reality, and that's why conflict is good. That's why people following their passions is good. That's why fighting is good, because it causes evolution. And one can set aside the morality, but they're objectively right. It does cause evolution. And the Sith will say that, that's inherently true. So why lie about it?
Progress has a price.
Yes.
I may have recently started watching For All Mankind again, which is, boy,
that's fantastic.
Imagine if we could get Ronald D. Moore to do Star Wars. Yeah, it's just not.
Ronald D. Moore Star Wars would be fascinating.
Too much for the world to handle. I don't think it's ready. I don't think we can handle that. That would be too
great.
He did it in Galactica.
Yeah,
and
right.
Everything. His version of Star Wars is Battlestar Galactica, and it improved on a fun show that I saw as a kid and made it a deeply philosophical show that has a lot to say. Much more bringing it back to Star Wars. I mean, Battlestar Galactica spent 7 seasons exploring politics, religion, morality, abortion, everything, right?
The nature of humanity itself.
Yeah.
And it didn't take easy answers, but it did so with good storytelling.
Exactly. And the thing is too, is that I don't even, I hate to say it, but Star Wars he'd probably give a similar response that Christopher Nolan understandably gave. He'd probably be like, yeah, that's kind of beneath me, and why would he have to? He's got an original show now.
Yeah.
And it's a really great piece of work, but yeah.
So then we can talk a little bit, I think, about the overindulgence of the rich, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, on one hand, I absolutely believe that, spending more money on just frivolous things, because you can as rich, instead of helping out your fellow person, it's not that great. But then I also actually subscribe to a old, I believe it's actually a Muslim tradition of what they call the 10th part, which is the idea of whatever you gain, you give a 10th of what you've gained to your community.
Well, there's a zakat system in Islam. I think the 10th is a tithing system that comes out of the Bible, right? But in Islam, there's a zakat system that's actually it's organized a little differently. You do give a 10th of agricultural goods, which is what the Bible is talking about, right? But when it comes to other economics, you give 0.5% of your net worth annually. So so it depends. It depends on the goods. It links down to if you have like an orchard and there's no effort required to pick apples from it, and you sell those apples, well, 10% of those apples have to go back to the poor, right? And if you had to irrigate it and put effort into it, then 5% go back to the poor, because now you've earned something. And then in other things beyond the land which God is giving you, your own effort, like your businesses, then you give 2.5%. That's sort of the economics of it.
Yeah. Right. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is something worth, but I also believe that, like, look, if you put in the effort, like if it's not just like given to you, if you put in the effort to build it, you should be able to enjoy it. And if you enjoy it by playing games with money, I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah. Right? I'll put it to you guys. I'll put it to you guys like this. Like I don't know if I mentioned it on part 1, but I recently purchased an electric vehicle.
Okay.
You
did mention this, yes.
Of course, yes. By default, my head's always up my own ass, and I'm better than everyone. That's just when you guys buy your own, which it seems is the future. Eventually, you'll understand. But the thing is, I bought that. Okay, now, am I putting out less, immediate pollutants? Let's be honest. The pollutant's gonna be taken out somewhere, just not with the gas. Yeah, sure, but I also bought this for my own economic situation to help myself get better. I'm not gonna lie. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd probably buy like 3 different Camaros, 5 different houses in different locations that I want to live in. I might even just say screw it and buy a yacht within a yacht. But I would probably, send money to friends and family that have taken care of the ones that have taken care of me in the past. I already by default get back whatever comes from the success of YouTube. So that's a given. But
well, let me because we've talked about theology here. So let me give another perspective on wealth and transfer wealth.
Yes, I just wanted to finish my point real quick. And that's my point is that I would just balance out. I would balance out. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to enjoy frivolous stuff. I'm human just like everybody else. I'm not going to be that guy that says, I bought an EV to save the planet.
And there's nothing wrong with that because the frivolous thing you're purchasing is benefiting the people that are involved in producing it and it's an economy.
It benefits me as well significantly. Yeah. So it's it's not a sacrifice is what I'm trying to say, but it does have its benefits. It does have, and that's
So what I'd like to add in giving a perspective back to the Star Wars thing. There's Andrew Carnegie, who was one of the great industrialists of the 19th century, early 20th century United States. He was for a time the richest man in the world. An interesting guy. He was a poor Scottish immigrant, worked in a factory, and ended up becoming a brilliant businessman, set up the railways, and then became a multi-billionaire. Right. And what's fascinating about him is that, unlike a lot of these guys like Getty or Rockefeller of the same ilk, he dedicated the second half of his life to giving all of it away. I mean, he actually wrote The Gospel of Wealth, which I actually keep on my desk. This beautiful essay he wrote in the 1890s for the New York Times or whatever. But he wrote an essay that's now published as a book called The Gospel of Wealth. And he said at the time, Marxism is the big political ideology that's rising, and he's seeing it, and he warns that he says that Marxism is the result of what we're doing as capitalists, because what we're happening is we're doing this great work, which is advancing society, making all this money, railroads and all these things, telephones, telegraphs, and
industry.
And what's happening as a result of that is wealth is coalescing in a few people's hands like myself, and you're having a new development in human society that is an extreme feudalization that's much more extreme than what existed in the past, right? Of wealth control. Here we are today, 21st century, still with that situation. But what he said was this. He said, so as a result of that, people get resentful and ideologies like Marxism arise to try to, spread the wealth.
Balance it out. Yeah.
Exactly. But he said, and he wrote this in 1890 or so, he said, the problem is Marxist ideology, while well-intentioned, will lead to the impoverishment of everyone because, the simple reality is human beings are not able to central plan anything. They're not able to plan things on that scale, and it will lead to impoverishment. And he said this will lead to everybody losing. But the other alternative is what we're experiencing now in the late 19th century, which is vast poverty and a few guys like me incredibly rich. So what do we do? Yeah. So he said then he created the Gospel of Wealth. He said the purpose of wealth is to create industry, entrepreneurs, maximize your personal potential and help the world through that, and then give it all away. The entire thing is all about, because he set up, Andrew Carnegie, he financed nearly every single public library in the United States with his money. Right. He said, he was like, I don't believe in giving handouts. I'm going to build libraries because that way poor people can read books. They can't go to school. They can read books and they can advance themselves. Right. And so, and he set up universities, right. And massive things that had long-term impact. Right. And at the time, he was seen as some crazy rich guy, eccentric guy. But you think about that, that's probably a wiser middle path. You need industry, you need entrepreneurialism, you need business, you need free market. Right. But then you also need people who are benefiting from it to have a moral sense. Otherwise, the whole system will collapse.
Yeah, I actually want to propose a plan here that when the three of us are incredibly wealthy, the three of us agree to fight over status by trying to build the best infrastructure in the United States in terms of like, I'm going to build bigger libraries than you, and we'll compete over who can build the best civil infrastructure.
Well, you and I will do it. PD's going to do his own thing.
No, we are getting that Federal Reserve is going to get some muscle, baby. We are expanding that private bank. We are going to World War 3.5, and it's going to be a bigger, better war. It's going to be the biggest, best war ever, and it's going to make you rich. It's going to make you rich. It's going to make me rich. And as you said, just the three of us. That's all.
Well, see, we now have a Scythian perspective on it, and so
there you go.
This is the balance, right? But all right, so let's get back to Star Wars. So
wait, that means I have to kill you and Korea. I'm liking this. Keep going, Cameron.
Let's get back to Star Wars. We got because we have limited time.
So the next one I think we can talk about is the mistreatment of animals, which is another one of these themes that came up in there. And I think there were a lot of ways you can actually do that in a way that people are going to care about a little more, right? I think if they had done it more from like a mistreatment of Wookiees kind of perspective or something along those lines.
Or you find like an Ewok slave trade and try to milk some sympathy for the Ewoks. Yeah, I really did not. I think when I first saw this movie the first couple of times, the creatures were like it was like, what does Harry Plinkett like to say? You might not have noticed it, but your brain did.
Right.
And I was like, I looked at that creature and I'm like, that is so disgustingly Disney. It's got the eyes. It's got all the cues that James Cameron used for his little blue people in Avatar. And I'm like, this is really bad. Come on, movie, pull it together. And then it did shiny lightsaber battle things, and I was, lost in the illusion for a little while longer. The point is, it was that was like, it's worse than an after school special,
right?
Because at least you can go outside. When you pay for a movie, it's a lot to walk out. So the fact that people walked out when we talked about in part 1 in your theater, Cameron, when Leia flew through, like that's a lot of money. I went and saw this crap in IMAX.
Yeah.
But I mean, I
remind myself it's Star Wars, stupid.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the problem is these animals didn't really reflect a Star Wars theme,
and they weren't connected to the plot. See, exactly. You can have, for example. There is a theme with animal abuse, or that's actually deeper in Return of the Jedi when you talk about the Ewoks, right? So the Ewoks are these little bear people that are being mistreated or being ignored, the indigenous people of Endor, the moon of Endor, right? And so there's and you feel bad for them when you understand why they rebel against the stormtroopers, and then you feel bad when they get killed but it's all linked to this. They can't defeat the Empire without the help of these people, right? Who are an oppressed indigenous population under military occupation, right? So you see these other themes that are there. It's inherent to the story of a Jedi that they have to Return of the Jedi, that they have to do that. Here, it's literally you've left the main storyline, which is about the ship that's run out of fuel, that is being slow chased by the most powerful force in the universe that could just summon hundreds of ships from hyperspace,
just jump 5 ships ahead of them, and
block
cut them off.
Again, saying, well, that's the major arc problem of the story, but whatever. But even that, if you wanted to do an animal rights thing, you wouldn't leave that situation. You'd have Poe, and Rose try to infiltrate and get onto the other ship, and there they discover, as they're trying to shut off whatever thing they got to shut off, the tractor beam, whatever it is, they discover that the ship is being powered by slave labor, animal labor. Then it's relating to the thing. By saving our lives, we're also stopping this thing that's happening. We didn't realize the First Order was using slave labor on its ships by animal labor, right? Abusing animals or torturing them, or to power the ships, whatever it is. Then you had directly link the theme there. You can do it, right? Because Lucas did it. but it was never off topic of the story.
Right. And, and I think the other part of the problem was by including a section separately on slave labor, where they had these child slaves operating there.
Yeah.
You undercut your PETA style message.
It's undermining it. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we have the movie undermined by this plot, the PETA message undermined by, human slavery, and then the human slavery undermined by the PETA plot. And it's like watching some sort of like messaging leapfrog happen in the middle of the movie that makes zero sense. I mean, Cameron, if I was trying to fix this, I mean, if you were looking at this script, I don't know about you, but I think I probably would have deleted that entire section of the story.
No, you don't need counterpart. Like I said, you need to stay on the main storyline. If you go to another planet, then you need to stay on mission for that other planet. The entire adventure has to be find that hacker, and that has to be a point to that adventure. It can't be hacker is some random dude you never even talked to, just briefly, oh, the guy was standing there, but the guy with the red hat, you didn't notice, right? And then by Deus Ex Machina, the dude in the prison cell next to you is a hacker that can help you, right? It's that's just stupidity. That's the insulting part of this whole. This whole script is bad, but this section highlights how bad this is because this is garbage writing. It makes no sense at all. You could make a version of a story where, okay, one ship is hobbled, the other ship for some reason has to follow it and doesn't. You could make some version of that work, but this side story is pure garbage. It's pure garbage. Yeah. And as a storyteller, I'm like, this is insulting. What's happening here? This has nothing to do with anything. And of course, they make Rose the moron who has to propel all of this forward, which is deeply disrespectful to the actress.
In fact, just talking right now, I think the way to fix it would almost be they go track down this hacker. They don't really have too much of a difficulty doing it because this person wants to help. When they get on the ship that he, has stolen from some very wealthy industrialist, right? They use Rose to play the part of that person to infiltrate the ship. Like she's going to be investing in the First Order kind of thing and wants to take a look at their facilities. So you get to glam her up, fixing that problem, right? You bring, you have her bodyguard be, the what was it? Finn, right? And you have this hacker then having the freedom to be able to sneak in and do what he needs to do potentially, or get them captured if you want to go that backstabbing route, right? We could have done it that way. It probably would have taken the same amount of time and would have gotten an opportunity to show off some of the actors' potential, the beauty, and didn't just derail the plot, right? Yeah, I think that would have worked.
I mean, when he said it's a first draft, I wouldn't have handed in a first draft with this strange other sequence, right? I mean, it even in a first draft, you're like, this doesn't work. What's happening as you're writing this, right? Even a first draft, you're like, I got to throw this whole thing out. Why am I doing it, right? So it shows a complete lack of care, which is shocking because this is a talented filmmaker. Rian Johnson, behind the camera, is a stunning filmmaker, right? And he can make good movies. Brick, people love Brick. I really enjoyed Looper. I watched Looper multiple times. That's why I was excited for this movie. And this guy, it was intentional. He's not dumb. He did this as an act of contempt. Almost, what this reminds me of? Do you guys know there was a famous author in the 20th century from 1950s to the 80s called Harold Robbins, who wrote erotica? Have you heard of Harold?
Yes, okay. I've heard of him.
Yes, I read some of his books when I was a teenager. I was like, ooh, wow, this is pretty sexy stuff, right? But so Harold Robbins became the famous male erotica writer that was a worldwide bestseller, right? And he started off as a serious novelist. I've gotten some of his early books that he wrote that are serious novels that really aren't about sex. They're about themes that are deep, and he didn't succeed. And then he started writing this literary erotica stuff, and it was massively successful. And he was angry. He's like, I wrote this crap to survive. That's not even good. And people are buying this, but my literature, they don't want. And so he started writing more and more garbage, intentional garbage, out of contempt for his audience. And they kept being bestsellers. One point, this is how crazy it was, to show how stupid his audience was. Because he knew they didn't read his books. They skipped forward to the sex scenes. That's all, right? They didn't care about the plot. And so he wrote one book where halfway through the book, it becomes another book. Like he just, chapter 22 is a whole bunch of new characters. Like, and it's just a new storyline. And it's just as if you're reading chapter 21, if anyone bothered to read the book, they recognize what happened. We're suddenly in a new story. What happened to those other characters? And his agent and his publishers have, we read this, Harold.
Is there something weird going on here? Like, are you okay?
Yeah. And he literally said, your audience is going to be confused. He's like, and he said, quote, F them. F him. He did it on purpose. And then that book went on to be a bestseller, and the publisher, Simon & Schuster, never received one letter of complaint that the story made no sense because nobody read his books. They just read his sex scenes. It was an act of contempt for the audience. And
that's what this feels like.
Rich. And this is an act of contempt for the audience that made him rich.
And I really feel like this was like I wonder how much money they will give me that I can throw on a pile of fire.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's something sinister about this. It comes. I mean, Ed Wood made terrible movies, but they're not bad movies because he loved them. Plan 9 from Outer Space. That's a good movie. It's a terrible movie, but there's no ill will in it.
It's a good bad movie. Right?
It's a good bad movie because he doesn't know it's bad, and he wants you to love it. He wants you to love.
I'd even argue The Cube is like that too. Like it's the Cube is bad, but the people involved in it really wanted it to succeed, right?
So so this is an act of someone who had contempt, and the reason I'm focusing on it now is that this section proves it because it makes no sense. There's no reason for it to be in the story except to disrupt it.
It almost feels like he threw this in because he wanted to thumb his nose at everybody involved, right? Like he wanted to show, like, I can write anything and make $1 billion on this movie,
and he did. Right? I mean, he made his money, and the movie didn't make as much money as it could have, but it made up 1.3 billion, and then he went off to make hundreds of millions of dollars for Amazon, right?
Yeah,
on his deal in Amazon. I mean, this guy's worth probably $500 million now, right?
Yeah,
and is one of the most hated people in the fandom. And he doesn't care.
No. He dries his tears with the $100 bills, right? Like it's, but, and so I think now we move on to the scene. Like we have the buildup between Kylo Ren and Rey, where they've got like the Force Zoom call thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I watched that and I'm literally sitting there going like, this is a very modern take. This is a Zoom call situation. And I feel like the writer is just poking fun at the nonsense that happens in Zoom calls.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if Rey had gotten a cat filter somehow stuck in the Force, it would have been more obvious. But otherwise, I think it's basically that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all all of this is inside commentary of something he wants to say, right? And all of it is a screw you to something, right? And so I guess that's a screw you to modern Zoom culture.
Right. And I mean, personally, I didn't see the need for it, right? I didn't see the need for them to almost be like, given the environment to ship, other than he wanted to appeal to the 30-year-old moms who are Twilight obsessed, right? Like to build this shipping of a lack of understanding of what, the gotta get her the bad boy kind of culture there, right? I don't see it as any other reason to do it.
Yeah, I think we need to take a brief second here and maybe if we haven't made it possible to invite Ryan Johnson, me of course on behalf of the channel owner Corione, in this edited video.
Go for it.
Just give me retroactive permission and edit it, make it look professional. Oh, and put a chick in it, the thing. No, that's actually my point, because I think that Kathleen Kennedy's micromanaging, I think, is something that needs to be recognized and stated. And I would like for Mr. Johnson to maybe clarify just how much of this story was actually his influence and how much of it was actually also her and anybody else, acting on her behalf, trying to push the story or something. Because it's just, I don't know. On the one hand, I see what you're saying, Kamran, the whole, it's contempt for the audience. Well, okay, but Johnson didn't build up like an audience in his own trilogy or universe. So So I don't see like maybe he did get contempt by the end, but I think it was probably more so contempt for Kennedy. So maybe he torpedoed it on purpose to make her look bad and didn't care because.
I mean, that's possible. It's possible. He strikes me as a guy that regurgitates whatever the politics of the day are. He doesn't strike me as
he's a survivor.
He's a survivor, and I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Peter. I just think it comes from him. I don't think you can do this level of contempt as an act of screw you to your boss. I think this comes from him. It feels like it's from his heart. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the man, but it feels like
but
the artist.
I would love to have him, like sit down and explain this one day, but I suspect that until the Hague, until the International Criminal Court passes laws about movie content, I seriously doubt we're going to get him at the Hague to answer for his crimes against pop culture.
Well, and I think he's probably waiting. I mean, maybe actually get serious about reaching out to his agent after, KK is finally let go and out of influence in Lucasfilm and Hollywood, because then, I mean, that's probably the best time to formally ask. But I don't know. I just don't know what his intent was or what the motivation was. All I know is that part of this movie suffers from lack of planning for sure. There was no, they should have just given it to JJ. JJ probably would have just copy pasted Farce Awaken, or would have copy pasted episode 4, episode 5, episode 6, and retooled some things, and it would have been the same thing. But you know what? Even though people had issues with the lack of originality with Farce Awakens, a majority of the fan base was content. They were satisfied with where it was.
People were fine with it. Yeah. I was fine with it. It was the first Star Wars movie I didn't go back and see a second time. I walked out of it feeling a little hollow, and I didn't know why, right? Especially because I'd been hyped up on good stories from the EU for 20 years. So I was like, this doesn't really match up to the EU. But, but what it was, the difference is that he wasn't mean-spirited. Whereas The Last Jedi is mean-spirited. Abrams isn't mean-spirited. I do think he likes Star Wars. I think he does like Star Wars. I don't think he knows how to. I think he's lost his ability to create original stuff. I think he was once an original filmmaker. Regarding Henry is a great piece of work, right? That's his earliest work, and he was that. But I think he got rich early on, and it took it away from him. I met the man once for like a few minutes. I mean,
Kamran, that might have been the greatest pun of all time, that he lost his ability to write well. Oh, my friend. That was fantastic.
It was inspired. It was inspired.
Well, and that's a good point. He does love Star Wars, and maybe that's why he undid a lot of Last Jedi with Rise of Skywalker, but I don't know.
Going into Rise of Skywalker, I mean, that almost feels like let's try to rewind, get back to where I wanted to take this, and then
do all 3 movies in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and it doesn't work, right? So
hey, at least we tried it, and we can say it's bad. All right, back to
so this
we're never ever going to allow to happen to Star Wars ever again, or
the Force Zoom calls eventually lead to Rey meeting up with Kylo and them going before Snoke. Yeah. And remember how we were talking earlier, like in part 1, about how this isn't how you manage people, and that this is setting somebody up to not only betray you but really screw with you. Well, that's exactly what happens. That's absolutely exactly what happens. And if you're going to have a betrayal in a movie, we as the audience need to see it coming, in order to have a little bit of a tragedy moment where the person that it's occurring to had no clue that they were about to be betrayed. But we shouldn't be able to, it shouldn't be telegraphed to the bad guy as well, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what happened here. It was so telegraphed what was going to happen, and so ham-fisted, that the fact that it actually succeeded shows how poor a leader Snoke was, because I contend that you have an army of fallen Jedi Knights that you're in the room with you, and you're telling me none of them could stop this. I contend that they wanted it to happen because Snoke was just such a terrible boss. Right? And if you have the literal ability to read the minds and emotions of people around you through the Force, and you cannot feel all the grumbling around you of you are a terrible leader, and if somebody comes in here to shoot you, I'm going to stand around and say, oh no, please don't stop.
I'm gonna dance around lazily with my light knife thing and do a slow twirl and choreograph. Yeah, Star Wars Theory has, which, you know, little known 3.3 million sub channel about Star Wars. If you guys haven't heard of him, help him out. He really needs it.
Barely.
Anyway,
barely.
He has a valid point, and this is, you know, for all the Disney Wars products right now. They need to get the choreographer that they had for the prequels. I completely agree with that.
Okay, I would disagree on that. I actually really didn't enjoy the choreography for the sword fights in the prequels. I really enjoyed the Last Jedi lightsaber choreography because that felt more true to life.
Sorry, say again.
So the choreography in the Return of the Jedi was probably the best choreography.
Yeah,
of
that is
lightsaber
still the
combat.
best fight. I agree. Actually, I think he was also one of the coordinators for it too. It wasn't just the, I can't remember now.
I would also argue when Ray Park was doing the choreography in Phantom Menace, it was fantastic.
Oh no, that was fantastic. I mean, that was now looking back after these sequels, I very much enjoy Episode 1. I didn't like Episode 1 the first time. I will happily watch Episode 1 multiple times. You know, because again, it's Lucas. It's Lucas. I think some of it does. I think most of it doesn't really. Most of it isn't at the level of what it could be, but there's still heart to it. And what I did love when I saw them, which as I went and saw it multiple times, even though I was kind of disappointed by the story the first time I saw it, was the Ray Park, choreography and that final Duel of the Fates, that battle. I mean, there's breathtaking. It's like a ballet. Like I said, Duel of the Fates. There's moments in there where I stopped breathing when they were, when they had the lightsaber battle between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul. I mean, it was like it was magic. So I was like, all right, there's still someone who loves it that's there, right? Yeah. And I watched it multiple times just to see that scene again.
Yeah, the other pieces that I really enjoyed, now this may be my biases showing, right? But whenever Christopher Lee is using a lightsaber, he's fighting like an actual sword fighter, right? He's moving like there are 3 rules really in actual sword fighting. One of them is economy of movement. If you have to move less than your opponent, they will tire out first.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's rope-a-dope, rope-a-dope.
Right. Okay. Part 2 is your actions. You should be taking minimal actions for maximum results. Flicks of the wrist, small movements of the elbow are preferable to big movements because it's harder it's harder for your opponent to realize what you're doing when you move like that. Basically, obfuscation of your actions, right? And the third one is positioning matters more than anything else, right? I mean, we kind of get that with I have the high ground, but the truth of the matter is it's actually pretty legit, right? If you are in a position where you can maneuver your opponent into a spot where he doesn't have an option to escape from, you can go full out very fast and he'll be stuck, right? One of the greatest fencers of all time. So in fencing, you are not actually allowed to make physical contact, like punch your opponent, as an example.
Right. It's all sword contact. Yes.
It's all sword contact. But there was actually a very successful Olympic fencer who would full on speed down the line and charge at the opponent, making them think that they were going to check them like a hockey player on full speed ram.
Mm-hmm.
And the person would either have to move out of the way or move into the guy's sword. And if they moved out of the way, they'd be rounded out and they'd lose points. So the guy could win on like one contact and just continuously charge down the piece that whole time, right? And he was very successful. He actually made it into the Olympics for years doing this technique because it was very hard inside the rules to beat it. And it was because he used the fact that the terrain you're fighting on is only a direct line. There is not a lot of maneuvering side to side. And he used that to his advantage. That's using the terrain. That's using the environment you're fighting in. That's why footwork is so important to an actual sword fighter.
So
we don't see a lot of that. We see a lot of flips and whatnot where you're exposing your back to the enemy.
Yeah. Because it looks cool for a movie, but it's not realistic, which is why we go back to Christopher Lee. Now, Christopher Lee is obviously, you know, a classic actor who has worked, you know, for decades, I'm sure, along with fighting Von Helsing as Dracula, I'm sure there's been, I have to go back his filmography. I'm sure he's done medieval epics and things like that. I'm sure he's got that stuff under his thing. I'm sure Christopher Lee has years of training in old scope, sword fighting.
Well, during World War II, he was actually trained in sword fighting by the same Hungarian cavalry individuals that trained my trainer. So I know his pedigree, if you will, and it's impeccable. So,
and he still had that training as an old man years later.
Yeah.
Right? And that brought the truth to that scene. So yeah. So we should wind back to, because I've got about 15 more minutes for this. So we wind back. So that sequence, that whole sequence was anticlimactic for the reasons that you're talking about, the fight sequence, which is, again, poor screenwriting. It's the opposite of what was happening in Return of the Jedi, which is climactic, right? That incredible battle where we see Luke giving in to the dark side out of, again, fear for his sister, in the same way his father gave in the dark side for fear for his wife, right? Fear for losing someone he loved is the pathway into the dark side. And it's climactic because Vader is overwhelmed, and Luke has that drop on him. He's got the saber on his neck, and Palpatine gives him the thing, to kill your father.
Kill him.
Yeah, take my and at right hand. And there's a moment you can tell where Luke is thinking that, I could just do this, and then it'll be what Anakin thought. I will become this right guy's hand. I'll get rid of him, and then I'll bring peace and end the war, right? And there's a moment he's tempted to do it. You can feel it in Mark Hamill's incredible acting, right?
Yeah.
And then then he looks at his hand. What does it is that he sees his father's hand that Count Dooku had cut off, right? He sees his father's hand and sees his hand, and he's like, I'm already becoming this guy, and I don't want to become this guy, right?
That's
and I'm gonna end up like this guy one day on my back while this guy's having somebody try to kill me, right? No, I'm not doing the cycle, and he breaks it, and so it's incredibly climactic, and then the resolution with Vader coming to save his life. I remember as a kid watching it, I was screaming in the theater when Vader finally turned on the Emperor, right? But again, it was building to it. The music, the feeling, you're like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do?
Everything.
Father, please help me. Please save me. And then he grabs him. And I was just 12-year-old kid screaming and jumping up and down and laughing and crying when he threw the Emperor down the pit. It's the exact opposite of the feeling I had watching this. I was emotionally dead watching this because none of it was set up properly, because all of it had been given away. The outcome of it, I was like, is this dude just going to kill Snoke? And is he going to kill Snoke because the guy's been a jerk to him and he's kind of got the hots for the girl? I was like, I could see where it was going and I didn't care.
Yeah.
When it happened, I kind of felt angry. I was like, you deprived.
There was no stakes really in the fight.
Yeah, and you deprived me of a villain. I'm like, the Emperor got us going. We heard about him in episode 1 or episode 4. We saw a hologram of him in episode 5, and we meet him as a major character in episode 6. You built up. I mean, this guy, I was like, where's the Snow character? I mean, I need a big bad. You've taken the big bad halfway through this movie. Literally at the middle point of your Legend trilogy, you take out the big bad. And frankly, Kylo ain't enough for me to be afraid of him. He's not the big bad. So I'm like, I don't see any reason to watch this movie anymore. There's no big bad. And you got another movie coming? I mean, I don't care. And I got angry. I was like, you're taking away my enjoyment of not just this movie, but of whatever this trilogy was supposed to be.
Yeah. Now, and that actually leads to the next, I would argue, major part of this that actually matters, because people have talked the Holdo pieces to death, where she, is somehow this soulful saint that we should all feel sorry for, that she sacrifices her life for the rest of the fleet and what have you. I think which is ridiculous. But I think the next scene we really have to talk about is when they're down on the planet and we get Luke's triumphant return, which everyone was thrilled about, where he's actually coming back in, and that fight scene I thought was actually really clever.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're gonna like force project your way through and you've got everyone convinced you're actually there, but you're not, and you're doing this fight, it was I was actually happy about that. But I think it would have been more impactful if Luke had actually gotten off the sidelines and actually gotten involved. This was like a half measure, which really seems to be the theme of this movie, is half measures. Right? And yes, seeing the scene with Luke and Leia together, talking a little bit was great. Seeing a scene where, Luke finally once again confronts the bad guy was great. But the problem is we've been building Rey into the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have the heroic standoff against who we are being revealed as the supposed big bad. So the movie subverts its own attempts to get us to care.
Well, that's what happens. It's a black hole of internal subversion. Subverts the external world, and then it sucks itself into destruction, right? Know, and then it just leaps forward with Rey becoming heroic by suddenly magically being able to lift more boulders than Luke could after weeks of training, right? He could barely lift one thing, right? He couldn't even get the X-wing out. Right, and then she lifts entire group of boulders. I mean, so again, it was just careless storytelling. It was again insulting because if you want a climax, you were with Luke and Kylo, then give us a climax with Luke and Kylo, right?
Right.
It serves no purpose. What is Luke projecting himself there for? What does he think he's going to accomplish? He doesn't know that Rey is going to show up and save the day. He doesn't even know that she has the power to do that, right?
Right.
And so what is he doing by distracting Kylo for 5 minutes while they're all trapped in a cave that there's no way out of, as far as he knows? It doesn't make any sense at all. If he comes there with an actual distraction that helps them escape, then there's something that makes sense there. But it's a Deus Ex Machina. It's a Deus Ex Force, right? Or Force Ex Machina, where she shows up and she releases them from the back of the cave with the rocks.
We need a little bit more of a setup of a plan so that we at least know what's going on, right?
Well, that's what there is no plan. Every single scene, because these series of videos we've been doing here have been about the storytelling. And the problem is this: it's very clear to me that this is the worst example of what I call Damon Lindelof writing. Damon Lindelof just makes it up as he goes along, right? I mean, we talked about Lost. At least I think J.J. Abrams planned stories. Lindelof doesn't. He just makes it up as he goes along. You see that from Lost. You see that from any movie he's ever made. He literally just makes up every scene as he goes along, right? The difference is that his output is not necessarily good. Often it's bad, but it's not necessarily mean-spirited. It's just a little sort of like supercilious, like I'm so smart, I don't need to follow story structure. It's more like personal arrogance, like I'm so smart, I don't need to follow the rules of storytelling, right? That's Lindelof's approach. This guy is he's making up as he goes along, and every scene he's like, how can I screw these people over? I know it doesn't make any sense. He's too smart. Lindelof doesn't know he's a bad writer. He doesn't know he's a bad writer. He's surprised that people don't get it, right? Mr. Johnson knew this is a bad script. He's too intelligent a man and too successful previously a filmmaker to not know this is a bad script. So every scene is, I don't have a plan. I know there's no plan. I don't want there to be a plan. And how can I use this screen to say screw you to the audience, right? And that's what every single scene is. And that's mean-spirited lack of structure. I've never seen anything like it. That's why I call this the worst movie ever made. It's the worst film ever made. It's the worst script ever written, because I've never come across a produced script. I'm sure a lot of scripts by angry hack writers that don't get made who are bitter about being writers, right? A lot of those, thousands of those floating around, right? But this one actually got made for hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And it's mean-spirited, and I've never seen anything like it. And I don't think we ever will. I think this was
I hope we never see anything else from like this.
At least, especially in Star Wars, like this is so. It was. I see what you're saying, Cameron, and I mean it is a bit more of a refreshing perspective, because I didn't think to see it like that. But yeah, this movie doesn't, like, the one thing that always kept me coming back, and the one thing that took me a while to break the illusion, was rewatching the film, and you get to that Yoda scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was definitely the heartstringy nostalgia, Beatty moment of the film.
Well, I would actually argue that scene is not Luke and Yoda. That is George Lucas in a Yoda suit, and Rian Johnson in the Luke suit. And Yoda is saying, like, look, I want you to carry on my legacy. I want you to make something from it. Right? And Luke is kind of going, yeah, but this is all dumb and stupid and what have you. And Yoda's like, yeah, but people need that. Right? People need this in their lives because the lack of that is terrible. And Luke still doesn't get it. And I think that perfectly sums up that relationship there between the original creator and the bully child that goes and plays in the kid's sandbox. Right?
And so, I mean, and that's what it comes down to. This is a bully, someone who watched all the kids playing with Star Wars toys at lunchtime and came over to their table and said, "Can I play too?" And then they all like him, they all trust him, and then he takes their toys and breaks them and laughs. Right? That's what this was, and that's why it's mean spirited. And I'll never understand what happened that made Mr. Johnson do this, because I do believe it's personal. I don't necessarily subscribe to PD's theory that it may just be a commentary to his boss. I definitely think he was giving his boss what she wanted, but it's too deep and too personal. So maybe there's something about his personal experiences with being the only kid in high school that didn't like Star Wars and being made fun of. There's something deeply personal about his behavior here.
I would like to grab a Luke doll and ask him to show me where Star Wars hurt him, right?
Yeah. And we know Miss Kennedy has her issues with Mark Hamill and with all the cast she's worked with all the men she's worked with. We know those are personal issues, right? So we understand why she would be, when she saw that draft, she said, "This is great. We're going to film this." And he probably said, "Really? All right, sure, just pay me. I don't care. I really don't care. I mean, but fine. Yeah. We want to do that." Sure. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, and he knew it was going to be terrible, and he went with it anyway. And I think that shows, I oscillate often when I think about this movie between, was he doing this because it was a paycheck, or was he doing this because, no, this is my opportunity to get revenge on Star Wars fans everywhere?
It has to be the latter, because paycheck isn't mean-spirited. Paycheck, you do your job, you phone it in. It has to be the latter, because I've never seen anything like it, and it's so overwhelming that this. I'm going to use some words that will sound like hyperbole, but it's not hyperbolic, because I'm a storyteller and storytelling matters to me.
Right.
It's evil. I mean, that's what I couldn't sleep that night. When I walked out of it, it was evil. It was someone, literally as if someone had taken the Ark of the Covenant and unleashed the angels inside against the good guys, right? It was something it was a perversion of the power of storytelling, of the greatest myth of modern time. It felt like an attack on faith itself, because that is the Force and all the mysticism of the Jedi. All that is a modern retelling of ancient wisdom, of Taoism, of Sufism, Lucas studied all of that. It's an attempt to repackage ancient profound mysticism, and this is an attack on that. And so it was an attack on what makes us human. That I'm using sounds like hyperbole. It's not hyperbole. That's what it was. That's why it caused the damage that it did. That's why I couldn't sleep that night. That's why it propelled me to start looking on YouTube to see if I was alone, and then started me getting friends on YouTube, and now I'm here with you guys, right? This guy, in the end, he will be a catalyst for good, just like evil is always a catalyst for good, right? It wakes you up. It wakes you up out of your slumber and realize something's happening, right? And now I got to do something and maybe make something good out of this situation. And so he served his purpose, but that was not his intention.
Yeah. All right. We're going to wrap it up. But before we do, Kamran, you have probably the greatest Patreon mankind has ever known. Would you please plug it for us here on the channel?
Well, I'm honored you would say that, and I have definitely. I'm proud of what the Patreon's become 3 years into it. But yes, it's Patreon. You've got I think it's on the screen there. Patreon.com/Kamran Pasha, and both of these gentlemen are members. But in the last 3 years, it has become more than my just commentary on Hollywood. We got to a place where suddenly got all these interesting people from different companies, including Lucasfilm, Marvel, others started leaking information to me that's largely proven accurate. That's interesting, but even more significantly, we've created an incredible community with gentlemen like this who are deep thinkers about the nature of story, and everyone on there is contributing. We've got hundreds of people commenting, doing their own investigations of things, finding stuff that I didn't know, bringing new insights. It's a few hundred people, and it's some of the classiest people I've ever seen. So come, it's $5 a month. It's worth a cup of coffee, and join us because there's nothing like it, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, guys, thank you so much for doing this with me. It's wonderful having both of you on my 100th episode on the channel. Guys, once again, thank you. And thank you to all the viewers. I could not do this channel without your feedback, your encouragement, and the joy you guys give me. So thank you all. And here's to the next 100. Take care, everybody. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take care, everybody.